Hey y'all, thanks for tuning in to season two, episode 42 of the Peace Podcast. Just give me my voice, whatever that looks like. This came to me, in the car listening to my teenage daughter. I think I've told you guys this a million times that she is everything that I wish that I could have been when I was that age, but I just wasn't that way. And so she was talking to me about one of her friends and a relationship that friend is in, and how, she was having a conversation with that friend and she just came out and told her, this is not the way that you should be treated. This is not the things that we accept from a person. If it was me, I would just block and delete this person. And while her delivery may not have been influential to this friend of hers, what it made me think of was, wow, I wouldn't even have been brave enough to give my friends that advice. Like, I probably would have held that in and not said anything simply because I didn't want them to feel badly about the decision that they'd made. So I would have held it in. Now, obviously, now in my older age and being an adult and going through some things, I would say whatever it is that I felt needed to be said. But in the midst of my teenage years, I never would have said those things. And so then I thought to myself, what is it about her that makes her confident in using her voice that I didn't have when I was that age? And when I think back to the way that I tried to shrink myself and the way that I tried to just kind of stay in the corner and not be seen or heard, because I knew that when I was, that there was, some sort of conflict, chaos, or someone was going to be combative to the things that I said, even though I had strong feelings about certain things and I maybe disagreed, and eventually those things would come to the surface. And I always say you either implode or explode. And after imploding for so long, they exploded with my family system. But in her case, that doesn't happen because she just outwardly says how she feels and she keeps it moving and she makes sure that she's a support system for that friend. But in my case, I was very much so attached to not rocking the boat and not making anybody feel a certain way. And so I would just stay silent. And I realize now that that silence and that shrinking made me feel safer because I knew that I would only have to fight my internal battles myself. And I could predict those pretty easily because I knew what would happen if I stuffed emotions. I knew what would happen if, you know, I did it for too long. I would probably cry and then I would get over it. And that would be a whole thing. I was probably going to, tell my parents one thing and do another just to be able to have the things that I wanted and do the things that I wanted to do. But not saying that that was always the right thing. But having those conversations and being open and honest was not going to happen because I knew that that was going to lead to some sort of conflict. And I would rather have that conflict internally than to ever have it externally. And so when you're thinking about yourself as an adult, right, we adapt and adopt those same qualities and characteristics that we have acquired when we're children. We adapt and adopt them for our adulthood. And if we are in spaces, places, and with faces where we don't 100% feel confident and comfortable to include ourselves in the conversation, we oftentimes revert back to those behaviors of shrinking, not saying anything, agreeing with things that we don't necessarily agree with. And I'm not trying to encourage you to be an internet warrior after this current election and go into people's inboxes and on their post and comment and just create chaos that is going to happen regardless, just because there's division there and you're on two totally different sides. But what I am saying is that as an adult, if you're in a conversation and if you're in a space where you're involved in a relationship, or you're thinking of your family system, and you find yourself staying silent and shrinking more than you actually are speaking up for yourself and saying the things that you need to say. In fact, you find that you're not even able to speak up for your kids and say the things that need to be said to defend them because you're so used to shrinking and not finding your voice. This episode is for you. So it is time for us to rediscover our voices, right? if life and the things that you have endured have made you feel like silence is the safest space to be in, then I would urge you to recalculate that information, because we can't walk into our adult. It's the reason why sometimes you'll be in a conversation and you still feel like a child in a conversation with adults, because you are still adopting those childlike characteristics and you're still being influenced by the way that you were spoken to as a child, even though you're no longer one. And so you tend to navigate that conversation in those same spaces and ways. You don't have to do that anymore. You're a whole adult. You get to decide if you want to be in the conversation. You get to decide if you want to interject your opinion into the conversation. You get to decide if you want to leave the conversation. You get to decide what your opinion is and the way you feel about something, and you don't have to be influenced by the people around you, nor do you have to conform to their thought processes. And so, what are some things to know when you're in a space where you're heavily trying to gain your voice back? Not in a way where it's, I just want to be loud so I'm heard, right? The polarity of what you experienced when you were younger, but in a way that's like, you know what? I have a voice, I have an opinion, I have my presence is in these places, and I have the ability to influence the situation by speaking. No longer am I going to stay silent because I feel like that's the safer option. And so some things to know are, the first, that you deserve to draw breath and take up space no matter where you are. If God has you in that place, then you deserve to draw breath and take up space. And your voice is one of the things that is going to take up that space. And whether it is received well or not, you do not have to feel like you need to shrink because someone else is not um accepting your voice in the space. Maybe they don't want to hear what you have to say because it's calling them out on their behaviors. Maybe they don't want to hear what you have to say because it makes them feel unsafe that you are disagreeing with them. Maybe they don't want to hear what you have to say because the more you speak, the less they understand their own um, stance on that subject or issue. Maybe they don't want to hear your voice because you're a mirror to them and they don't say those things about themselves because they're used to being the victim, and you are not a victim. And so, therefore, you put the real life information in the room and they can't stand to hear it because they have to be the victim in the situation and they can't have accountability. Whatever it is, notice how every single one of those instances where I said maybe, it was how someone else is reacting to your voice. You do not have to conform your voice to a way that is more accepted by the people around you, more palatable to the people around you. Your voice is your voice. You get to have your opinion. You get to draw breath and hold space. Another thing to remember is that your unique perspective is important. No one in this world has gone through the exact same experience as you, has had their story crafted the exact same way that yours is crafted. They don't have the same family systems. They don't have the same operating systems. They don't have the same religious beliefs. They don't have the same relationship with God, relationship with their children, relationship with the people around them. And so, therefore, your perspective is 100% unique to the experiences that you've had. And because of that, even if you share a similar opinion as somebody, your perspective is not in the room already. So when you're silencing yourself and you're thinking, oh God, I shouldn't say that, or maybe I should raise my hand. No, I don't really want to be the one to say this out loud, or I don't really want to be the one to call this out, or I'd rather just stay silent because it's safer. You're actually robbing the people who are in the room from your unique perspective and perhaps the ability to see things in a different way. And obviously, everyone in the room has to be open minded to hear those things, but The result of not saying anything is that you're always going to be in that space being misunderstood and not heard. Because if you don't speak, you're never going to be understood. And if you don't speak, you certainly aren't going to be heard. So if you think that being silent makes you safe, then what you're saying is that safety requires for you to be unheard and unseen. But we know that vulnerability will have every single one of us wanting to be seen for who we are and heard for what we need. But yet you can't do that if you're in a space where you're remaining silent to feel safe. Safety is in being able to be fully and authentically you. And perhaps the people in the room need to work on their willingness and able and their ability to be able to be influenced by other people or to be able to be um see things with clearer perspectives and different perspectives, looking at the side of that beach ball where there's all these different stripes on the beach ball and knowing that your stripe isn't going to be the same as everybody else's stripe, but that all the stripes can be on the beach ball and they all have space to be there. If you're not around people who are open-minded to accepting that, then understand that that is a little bit more of a difficult space to be in to sharing your perspective. However, the way that you share it is important. No matter how you share it, it is better than you remaining fully silent, especially when I've found that the people who were very silenced as children and throughout their teenage years oftentimes are the people who have the most intelligence and well-crafted responses when they're given a platform to actually speak because they've been ruminating on those thoughts for literal decades. So they're very well versed in the thing because their thought processes have been full of the thing. I've also found that the people who feel like they need to talk about everything and they're always the loudest one in the room and they're always the ones who don't really take time to internally process because they just are a constant regurgitation of information that is flowing through their brain. Those people don't tend to have the most thought out answers, and most of the time those people are the ones that are proven incorrect in conversations because they just speak to be heard and speak to be speaking and to hear their own voice as opposed to having a well crafted response. And so I say all of that to say your perspective is important. You deserve to draw a breath and take up space. And no matter if you're right, wrong, or indifferent, your unique perspective should be in the room. And the place you belong in will desire your voice. So if you're in a relationship and that person that you're in relationship with doesn't want to hear your perspective, then you probably don't belong there. Because if the person that you're with doesn't want to hear what you have to say about whatever that experience is, then they probably don't value your perspective. And so, what's the point of a relationship if you don't even value your partner's perspective? The place you belong in will value you enough to want to hear your perspective. When I facilitate meetings, it is very important to me that all voices are heard. And so I facilitate meetings in a way that every single person has a space to be able to share their perspective. Am I going to like everyone's perspective? No. But do I find it important to make sure that every single voice in the room is heard? Yes. And why? Because obviously I have that core wound from childhood, but also because I've found that in those instances, there are probably perspectives that other people haven't even thought of before. And when you don't open the floor for those perspectives to be heard, then they're completely missed. And secondly, I find that it builds an equal respect when every single person has had the floor and there's not one person who has more time and space on the floor than any other person. And so if you're in relationship with people or if you're in places or you're with faces and in spaces with people who do not desire to hear your perspective, then I would argue that you probably don't belong in those spaces. If they're having a meeting and they don't ask you, and you should be valued in that meeting and your voice should be heard in that meeting, then they probably don't value your perspective. If they're making decisions and they forget to consult you, then they probably don't value you and your perspective in that decision making process. And so when you're trying to rediscover your voice and when you're trying to understand that the safest place is not the silent place, then what you have to understand is that you really have to get connected and aligned with where you belong. because you don't belong in a space where you constantly have to argue to get heard. You don't belong in a space where you constantly have to beg for the space or opportunity to speak. You belong in a space where people value your voice and hold space for you to have a voice in that place, even if they don't agree with you. And the only way to rediscover your voice, the only way to stop imploding and then exploding because you've had to be silent for so long, is to put yourself in environments where your voice is not only just accepted, but valued. And something that I really, really hope that comes to the top of this conversation is that the external turmoil that you're trying to eliminate from experiencing by being silent will turn into internal turmoil. So that silence is going to cause that turmoil inside of you instead of the turmoil that you fear from the outside. Either way, it's not safe, it's self destructive to remain silent. So, if you find yourself in that space today where you question whether you should share the thing that popped into your head, or whether people are going to think a certain way about you, or whether they really want to hear your opinion in the first place, or whether your opinion is important, I would encourage you with two things. One, you are valuable, your opinion is very important, and your unique perspective is what will help people to shape a well-rounded perspective and opinion of situations. And secondly, if you're in a space where you're staying silent to be safe, I would offer that what you're doing to yourself internally is far worse than what could happen externally. And if externally an explosion happens because that person can't handle to hear your opinion, they'd rather you remain silenced, then what you really need to deem to be true in that situation is that that person would rather you silent and in your own turmoil than for you to be sharing your opinions and feelings and to be creating them some sort of turmoil or chaos. And anyone who loves you, cares about you, or values you will not want you in that space. So, if you find yourself in that space today and you need someone to reach out to you, always remember that you can reach out to me in my DMs on all my socials. Like and subscribe to this page, share it with a friend. Remember that knowledge gained and kept to yourself is selfish, but shared with everyone else may help them break free from the bondage that they're experiencing and get them to a space of freedom. That's the whole reason why I share my testimony and things that I've gone through, because I know that living in bondage is not safe, no matter how safe it feels, because you know how to navigate it. And what is safe is being able to draw breath, take up space, and live in this world in a way that brings you joy and allows you to walk in the will that God has for your life. I appreciate you for tuning in, and I'll see you again next time.